The first time I pointed out that there was something wrong with my grandma, I learned a harsh truth. No one wants to listen to a 6-year-old, no matter how much she tries. Uncle Larry took a sip out of his silver flask while my mother's mind strayed away from us and into her favorite soap opera, Rosine Blanche. Upstairs, my cousins kept yowling about who would have the next turn to play with Stretch Armstrong, a foul-smelling doll that was actually a super-duper action hero, or at least that's what my cousin Jimmy sold to the rest of us. "Yes, dear, all right," my mother muttered without missing a single line of Brett Reynolds' dialogue. I had never seen someone sit at the literal edge of their seat. She reminded me of a fletching about to take flight for the first time. A loud rap at the front door made the remnants of my gut squirm and shrink. Uncle Larry stood from the sofa, carefully shrouding his flask within the deep pockets of his grey wool coat. I never knew what was inside of that bottle. He would not say, and I certainly never asked. If there was anything that I had caught on as a member of this family, is that you do not mess with Uncle Larry. "Mama, so nice seeing you," Larry said as he leaned towards Martha Lurkins. I then heard the thunderclap. Her slap sent Larry Lurkins from one side of the doorframe to the other before plummeting onto the floor. Uncle Larry stood about 2 heads and a half above Grandma. Seeing this midget of a woman bring my uncle, the mean macho, down to his knees felt so real. Had I not seen it with my own 2 eyes, I would have never believed it. "You've been drinking, Larry Alphonse Lurkins," she stated in a dry, moldy voice. "No, Mama, I never. Shut your trap, you insolent boy. I'll deal with you later," Grandma boomed as her eyes shifted away from my whimpering uncle and onto mine. My grandmother scraped off any anger from her face, just like a snake shedding off an old skin. The ire in her eyes became a quiet sea of green. The corners of her mouth slid through her wrinkles, creating an awkward smile that tingled the back of my head. "Hello there, my dear Amanda. Are you ready to go with me?" she said in a soft, almost genuine tenderness. I took a step back and opened my mouth. I called out for my mother as loud as my lungs allowed me to, yet what I actually heard coming out was nothing more than the mere whisper of a scream. Her hand clasped my right wrist. Her predatory and unusually long nails sank into my skin. For a second, I thought she had a steel vise instead of a hand. She was still smiling, perhaps with an even wider grin than before. "We have an important errand today, my dear. Let's go," she said. I... "Rita, I'm taking Amanda out," my grandmother cried through the front door and into the house. No one answered. Uncle Larry just lay there, in complete silence. The man who boasted almost every night that he could take on 10 of the best men of his platoon, the man who could bend an iron poker with his bare hands if he wanted to, that man sat there, unable to lift a single finger against Martha Lurkins. She pulled, and I followed. Outside the Lurkins household, the air whirled around us, making little baby tornadoes on the front lawn. The leaf-bearing trees swayed and creaked gently, yielding to the wind wailing through them. "We're going to have so much fun," my grandma said as she dragged me out like some old rag. I looked back at my house. Uncle Larry sat still, almost like a statue, with his eyes fixed on the wooden porch floor. She threw me quite effortlessly into the back seat of her '57 black Chevy. The stench was the first thing that hit me. Not even that dead weasel my brother and I had once found on our side of the main road reeked this bad. As she sat in the front seat, I covered my mouth and nose, happily realizing that my right arm was still attached even after that crone's death grip. It took her 3 tries to get the car going. I could hear her grinding her teeth as she squeezed the key through the ignition slot. After a cough or two of the engine, we were cruising through the main road. Grandma lived about 20 blocks away from us, but to me it felt like the distance between hell and heaven.
Today is a very special day, my dear. Today we soar, she announced triumphantly.
My grandma suddenly broke into a song. Every once in a while, between her strange chants, she would look back at me with that same creepy grin. I tried to, but I could not recognize any of the words. I am not even sure if it was even a language to begin with. Twilight overtook the road as the last slivers of light drowned under the mountain range. At a familiar rusty mailbox, my grandmother made a sharp right onto the dirt trail. Her cabin stood a mile or two ahead of us at that point. Grandma's breathing intensified as we approached her house. Winter was not particularly cold here in Marfa, but a faint copper fog oozed out of her mouth every time she exhaled. The car's engine died abruptly when we reached the front of her house.
My, they're expecting us, little one, she said.
A bolt of fear rushed from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. My grandmother was considered by most townsfolk as an odd, bizarre, and in some cases downright outlandish old hag. But this was a new level of grim. She blissfully skipped out of her Chevy and started singing her eerie melody again. A jangle crept into my ears. It was that damn song. It started out as an almost silent tune, but now it shrieked throughout my brain. She opened the back door and held out one of those talons she swore was a human hand. I did not move. If I recall right, that was her final stalemate. She gave me one last time to do things her way. She reached out violently, like a hawk trapping its prey. She grabbed one of my arms, the left one this time, and sank her nails even harder, probably as punishment for my disobedience. She then pulled me out of the car. She dragged me, once again, through the final stretch of the dirt road. This time I kicked and winced and pleaded. Any cheerfulness in her was replaced by dreadful muteness.
Grandma, please, Grandma, I want to go home.
You're just like Larry, you're just like the rest of them. Why can't you understand?
She replied. I felt heavy, as if someone had dumped 1,000 invisible sandbags on me. A pressure unlike anything I have ever felt in my life assaulted every inch of my body. A hooded figure opened the front door before my grandma had a chance to get anywhere near it. Without saying a word, he pointed at me and then back at my grandma.
At once, my lord,
my grandmother said. She lifted me up with her other claw of a hand and hurled me inside. For some reason, all the light bulbs were blacked out. Cobwebs and all sorts of insects had made the floor and furniture their den. You could almost hear them scratching and biting the inner fixtures of the woodwork. The air was at least 20 times more dense. My lungs ached every time I tried to breathe in. My heart pounded all the way to my skull. Someone had dug a hole in the middle of the living room. Freakish symbols were scattered around it. I did not recognize any of them, but staring at them for too long made half of the room start spinning a bit. A group of 4 hooded figures stood around the hole. I could not recognize the one that had greeted us at the door. Their robes were pretty much identical, some a tad more tattered than others, but they all exuded a nausea-inducing wretchedness.
Come,
one of them said in a hoarse voice. As I struggled to breathe, the world around me became a blur of motion. My grandma carried me closer to the hole. That's when she took out the knife. She carved a thin line on the palm of my left hand. I didn't feel any pain when she slid through. 10 seconds later, a mean froth took hold of my hand, extending all the way to my shoulder. The hooded figures stepped forward. One by one, they placed their icy hands around my forearm. My grandma then propped it over the abyss. They all squeezed in unison. A spurt of crimson escaped from the palm and into the pit. My grandmother spoke once more in that strange dialect. I did not need to understand her words to feel the malice seething out of them. Everything around me was immediately swallowed by a blinding darkness. Some might define dark as the absence of light. Yet in that void, I felt a constant presence everywhere around me. A guttural string of incomprehensible sounds resonated around me. I could not pinpoint who or what spoke, or if it was even addressed at me. The more I listened to it, the more it became clear that maybe I was not meant to understand whatever this thing was. The darkness stopped for a moment before screeching out one final message. I think it's a name. It's the only word that I was able to make out. Whenever I say it out loud, I get a shiver on my back, like it was branding on me somehow.
Kind Thrark.
The world suddenly became water, then darkness, and when I came back into my senses, I was laying on the termite-infested wooden floor of my grandmother's living room, surrounded by men clad in blue. "Are you alright?" one of the officers asked. I tried saying something, anything at all, but no coherent sentences would come out of me, at least not for a while. Turns out my dear old grandma was a wanted felon and a murder suspect in Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Louisiana. 12 kids ranging from the age of 3 to 7 had gone missing in all 3 states. None of them have ever been found. Number 13, Amanda Lurkins, was found unconscious in the living room of her grandmother's house, along with the remains of 5 other people. One of them, allegedly, was Martha Lurkins. At least that's what the dental samples state. Cause of death: explosion by an unknown overwhelming force. According to the official recollection of the facts, something, somehow, made all of the 5 bodies explode from the inside out, sparing only me in the process. The only piece of evidence that they could scavenge from Martha Lurkins' residence was an old journal. I was able to retrieve it a couple of years later, once I had grown the right assets for the job. You would be amazed to see what a pair of breasts can let you get away with. After being emotionally scarred by her descriptive sexual encounters, I found what I was looking for. One of my grandmother's many sexual partners invited her to a meeting that would open her eyes to the truth. Martha, probably fueled by lust and curiosity, decided to attend. Her journal became a completely different book after that 7th of May of 1976. It all spiraled down pretty quickly from that point onward. Everything was fair game. Black magic, witchcraft, seances, tarot, alchemy, you name it. Eventually she got her hands on an ancient grimoire. She was vague about its origins, and even more cryptic about its contents. Before switching to some indecipherable gibberish, she wrote about this being that predates any deities known to man. The only thing she wrote about it is its title, Creator and Devourer of Worlds. In one of her last entries, she wrote, "I will bring him into this world. I will be his mother." I can only assume that whatever my grandmother wanted to bring onto this world lashed back at her. The more I think about it, the less I can remember, hence why I'm writing this down in the first place. For the past couple of nights, I dreamt about impossible otherworldly landscapes, amorphous beings with millions of eyes, and an endless sea of black. I can hear someone calling out my name, but I never see who's calling. After a while, the darkness surrounds me, just like it did 18 years ago, and whenever I'm about to wake up, I can hear it whispering a barrage of words over and over. Last night, however, I was able to hear it clearly.